Congratulating the people of Newark, New Jersey, and their new mayor, Ross Baraka. See, sometimes you're caught by surprise. If anyone in this room is actually surprised by what happened. And the fact that it happened in Newark is no small thing. A city that is majority pressed, but is in proximity very close to New York City, and the largest city in New Jersey. And I think it's something that we have to study. I'm not particularly sure what vehicle they used to get there. I know that Ross Baraka had been a council member for a long time. But it's not exactly the same, though, as what happened in Jackson, Mississippi, though it has generated a lot of interest around the country and a lot of energy in Newark as well, and a lot of interest there. And it represents a departure from the status quo in Newark against a Cory Booker clone. And the only thing that I know of his program so far is that, they're seeking to turn, back this attack on public education. Most people, one of the things that catapulted Booker into the spotlight was his plans to change public education, which really was to privatize it. And he's always been for privatizing public education, whether it was vouchers or charterization. But he sort of got catapulted in the spotlight around that struggle because of how crumbling the infrastructure in the schools in Newark are. I don't know if people remember, he got that $100 million from Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook that was to be released as they got matching state and federal funds. And, so you're talking about $200 million, but what happened to it? Well, part of it was invested, some of it disappeared in the hands of consultants and cronies and things of that nature, but some of it went into getting this new contract with workers, which is an attack against the union and workers because it's a merit pay contract, and now they're launching this through this new superintendent that was put into place shortly before Booker left office to become senator. They're seeking to end tenure for teachers in Newark. So this is no small thing. It shows a departure, and it's a gauge for the movement there in Jersey City. And of course, we know that one of the most dynamic organizations, not just in New Jersey, but in the metropolitan area, People's Organization for Progress has a very strong base in Newark and has been working there for a very long time. So congratulations to the people of Newark, and we hope that our comrade and brother Larry Ham is doing better after the accident. And we have to continue to look at this development. And we also have to look at this trend, which is not a new trend, but it has picked up steam within the last few years of progressives and revolutionaries running for office. So we've run candidates over the years, but we don't. It's the platform from which we get to speak and put forward a program, but it's revolutionaries and progressives running and winning. And so we have to, begin to unpack that and look at these developments as they happen, not just in Newark, but in Jackson and elsewhere, where people, we have to look at the development of the sister from Kashama Sawant from Seattle, a socialist alternative, regardless of what we might think of socialist alternative, but to run openly as a socialist and to win election city council race is not a small thing, it's quite large. But our analysis as we look at these events, has to start with the question of what is the duty of a revolutionary in public office if you do win. If you enter into the governmental superstructure, now what? Because you're put in between, having to actually provide for actual real needs of people and, the ultimate principle of revolutionary, which is to overturn a brutal repressive system. And I don't believe that they're mutually exclusive. There are some that unfortunately look at it that way, but I juxtapose them because of the difficulty in navigating, the providing for needs, but also trying to put forward a program that mobilizes and galvanizes the masses to continue forward. And having a political program, but also a mass unit is what sort of set Jackson apart. and made it a beacon. It wasn't just Chokwe Lumumba himself. It wasn't just his capabilities. It wasn't his humanness or just his humanness or his compassion or his sterling record as a revolutionary, but it was, of course, those things were part of it, and we can't say that they weren't, but it was the People's Assembly as a model and the Jackson-Kush plan that made it such a dynamic thing. It was the principles calling for an independent political and economic power in the Black Belt South in the context of the national liberation struggle, and the Populist People Organization, which made it something that people could look forward to, and which made so many activists from around the country, not just, revolutionary Black nationalists, but also other oppressed groupings and revolutionaries wanted to see and study how that developed in Jackson, Mississippi. The concept, the assembly concept, which we have been trying to build, not just in New York but around the country, is not anything new. It is something that has been tried in different periods of history. In fact, a document that I actually like to look at was something that Sam wrote, I think it was after the LA Rebellion. After analyzing the events there, was a movement towards the People's Assembly? Yeah. And other, the All People's Congress was a similar type of vehicle. So the party has experimented with it as well throughout its history. And other organizations are now, and currently there are other organizations that have different models of building, like Project South and other organizations that are trying to build movement assemblies. So a lot of revolutionaries or leftist or progressive peoples are struggling with trying to develop this independent political body as sort of, a counter in this particular period of history to, sort of governmental superstructure, because people are learning every day that they have no faith in the politicians that they may elect to represent them, be it at a local level, state, or nationally. And so to help not just to empower people at a local level, at a root level, but also to show how we see people's democracy actually working in action, and to let it be a vehicle that further politicizes and mobilizes people. And so Jackson had a lot of these elements. The Jackson People's Assembly, which came out of the struggle around the effects before and after Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, it was a model that they had developed regularized meetings, and they were able to not just get Chokwe Lumumba elected to city council and then mayor, but put forward this Jackson-Kush plan as a way to develop Jackson in the area surrounding Jackson, but also as a model for the Black Belt South. And its program, the Jackson-Kush program, was actually very reminiscent of the PG, the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa. So the fact that they were able to win with such a program, with all the attacks against Chokwe and the red baiting, but it didn't scare people away, and he won with such a large margin, shows a turn in people's consciousness and their willingness to struggle. And I think that this was part of a step as we move forward to try and it's not, the assembly itself is not dual power. And it hadn't arrived to that point. You get to a point of dual power when you're able to actually challenge the bourgeois state. If you are able to function in a sort of quasi-governmental way, and you're able to sort of contend with government bodies, be it the city council, because you're able to mobilize people and they actually take action that pushes the city council back, that is a positive development and a great leap forward, but it's not to that point where you can actually contend with the state apparatus. But, as revolutionaries, we struggle and dream towards that day of building that type of organization, because that is definitely what is needed. But, laying all that out about the developments, in Jackson, Mississippi, actually having just come from there and having been there for the funeral, I would have to say that a lot of the energy that you could find there at the inauguration, traveling throughout the city, and whether you're talking to people on the streets or you're going into the restaurants, there was this energy and this spirit of people having reawakened and thinking that anything was possible. I'd be a liar if I said there wasn't a setback in the loss of Chokwe Lumumba. And it's a painful thing to have to admit, and I'm sure it is for the people of Jackson, Mississippi, and people who've been watching these things happen, the developments happen, that there has been a setback since his passing. It's hard to replace someone like that, but we also know that there are a lot of obstacles that are put in the way, and distractions that are put in the way, and things of that nature, that you have to sort of continue struggling and fighting and finding a way forward, despite whatever setbacks happen. And I think they're trying to do that, but they have some ways to come after his death. And that's just an honest assessment of the situation there now. And if you go through the city of Jackson and you see you can see the years of neglect of the city, it's hard to imagine. You go to, say, for instance, Albany, New York, and you see how Albany is built up. It's not that there aren't neighborhoods that are depressed and impoverished in Albany, but you see the infrastructure that's built in Albany, New York, as the seat of state government. And then you go to Jackson, Mississippi, and you see how the infrastructure has been crumbling in Jackson, Mississippi, and how it's been allowed to do so, and purposely so, because it's a city in the Black Belt South, but it is 80% oppressed people, 80% black people. And you understand why it's been allowed to happen in that city. So there is a lot to contend there. Even if Chokwe Lumumba was alive, to contend with this history was a very difficult thing. But we're in a much different place now that he has passed away. Most people are aware of the recent defeat of his son, Chokwe Lumumba, which was not as surprising, because when Chokwe, his father, first won the mayoral race, I think it was a surprise for a lot of people. But it was also a surprise for a lot of people when his son lost. Not as big of a surprise, but it was, and I'm not saying that they're the same people, we're our parents' children, we're not them. But he represented that legacy in forwarding that struggle. But he lost to Tony Yarber. And because it was a runoff election, 8 percentage points in a runoff election is actually significant. But after Tony Yarber won the race, shortly after it was announced that he won, just to show you how hostile, despite whatever some people were saying in the wake of Chokwe's death, right after the announcement, they began changing the codes in the city council building, so people who were hired as staff could not actually get entry into the building. Some of the people who had been hired in positions were immediately fired by Tony Yarber and his staff. They didn't wait days. This was like the night before they even changed city government even changed hands, and they tried to sabotage, the Jackson Rising Conference. And I'm going to get there, but I'm just trying to set it up. It was almost a question of whether or not the conference was actually going to be able to happen because of the undermining of it by Tony Yarber. And they're trying to undo a lot of the good work and the goodwill that was built up by Chokwe Lumumba. He's very much for continuing the neoliberal agenda that was the path of all the other mayors before Chokwe. He represents a departure from the progressiveness and the atmosphere of Chokwe, and a step back to what existed before. So this is the backdrop to the Jackson Rising Conference. And to talk about the conference, I will sort of begin with the superficial, the surface. If you were to just go when you were happening by and you happened to see it, and that is that it was well attended. It was a very large amount of people, over 500 people, that came from around the country, around Mississippi and Jackson, but most people from outside of Jackson, and most people from outside of Mississippi, from all over the country throughout the Black Belt South. So it had great representation, and many different organizations I would forget. I'm not going to name any of them because that would be just represent a small number of the organizations that were actually there. But a lot of organizations from the black left, from the left in general, some nonprofits and NGOs and people from the cooperative movement were there as well. And the workshops were well attended. There were many different workshops on developing the cooperative model, but there were also workshops on building workers' power to take control. And these were by some of our friends, like the Southern Workers Assembly, Saladin Muhammad, Black Left Unity Network, Black Workers for Justice. So there were workshops like that. There were workshops on different models of co-ops and workers who had built workers' co-ops were discussing some of their models, such as childcare co-ops and so on and so forth. And there were representatives from Ocean Spray, which I guess is a co-op, and Mondragon and other. And there was also workers from the old Republic Windows and Doors, which is now New Era Windows, which actually represents workers seizing the means of production and then keeping them. And later on, it became New Era and Windows. There was a deal worked out, obviously, and they were able to buy it and build a workers' co-op. So there was a worker from New Era Windows who made a presentation there. But I think that we've written on Mondragon in the past because it's talked about a lot in the left, the cooperative movement. And I think it is perhaps the largest co-op in terms of revenue, definitely, and in terms of, I think it's like $18 billion of revenue a year, 80-some thousand workers, many different countries, but the thing about cooperatives outside of the context of a political struggle, outside of being part of that political movement that is anti-capitalist and is looking to overthrow the capitalist system, is really just another form of doing business under capitalism. It represents a better form where workers realize you don't necessarily need a boss, but if you look at the motto of Mondragon, and we're being honest and open about it, then you have tiered levels of pay where some workers are getting paid minimum wage in other countries. So these things you have to begin to question. Workers have to undercut themselves because the rules of capitalism don't change. So in order to, cooperatives outside of the context of an anti-capitalist political movement that is seeking to go forward beyond just that, it's just, they're open to the same laws of any capitalist firm. And the same laws of capitalism. So though it might be nicer, if you're not seeking to overthrow the system, then you just can't take part in it. And there have been many models of cooperatives over the years that have failed because they could not compete with the larger capitalist firms that have destroyed them. But I'm not going to spend my time bashing Mondragon. I just think that there needs to be a perspective regarding, because it's brought up quite a bit. But what's happening in Jackson is that it's not as simple as building cooperatives for the sake of cooperatives. Partly it's the national question and trying to build independent economic power in the Black Belt South among the oppressed black masses, with the contradictions of cooperatives. But it's also that being part of a political movement to build independent political power in the Black Belt South. So we put it in that context with, the understanding that in Jackson, the comrades that are leading the movement there are very much aware of the contradictions and are seeking to move forward to make up for the fact that Jackson has been dealing with a situation where you have mass unemployment amongst a primarily black city, a crumbling infrastructure. You have a city that the vultures are sort of circling around because there's an estimated $2 to $3 billion that are going to be spent to rebuild the sewer and water treatment system because it is so antiquated, and there was a federal consent decree because of the polluting of the waters, because of the sewage seeping into the waters and things of that nature. So you have all these firms that are seeking to take that money, private firms take that money, and what the people of Jackson, are trying to do is to fix and rebuild the infrastructure in Jackson and put the people of Jackson to work, and using this model as a way for which to do it, as well as to make up for the fact that the public transit system is very antiquated and is not good enough for the people of Jackson, Mississippi. So they're dealing with the actual material reality of Jackson. But throughout the workshops, it wasn't all just cooperative. It was very cooperative heavy. That was what the conference was designed to talk about primarily, was workshops. But they also were analyzing the political movement, and especially in the wake of the passing of Chokwe Lumumba and the other developments that were happening around the country. It's not like these were a major feature of the conference, but these definitely were a part of some of the workshops. As far as what we can see as things develop, I think that it's something that we kind of just have to wait and see and pay attention to. I think that what a lot of the political movement, unfortunately, has turned its attention away from Jackson, and a lot of people in Jackson have been severely let down by the developments that have happened there, but the conditions continue to exist and continue to prevail. And I think that the Jackson Kush plan has not simply gone away. It's just that they're trying to develop it outside of having somebody in the mayoral seat in office there in Jackson. And to be honest with you, I think that it's very difficult to operate an official governmental capacity as a revolutionary. And sometimes it's better to be outside than to be inside. Because sometimes there's a tendency for people in the movement who are just everyday people who are going to work, taking care of their kids, to say, well, that person is going to fix everything. And to not realize that it is not that person alone, but it is a whole system that is aligned against them. And we have to ask ourselves that where would Venezuela be if it was not for the mass movement? Where would Hugo Chavez be? He would have possibly been killed with the coup there. And so the mass movement is the ultimate arbiter. And that's why I believe it's easy to just say and to look at things and to feel like I don't live in Jackson, obviously. I live across the Hudson. My family's from Mississippi, from Laurel in Heidelberg, Mississippi, which is about an hour and 30 minutes away. I'm going there for a family reunion in a couple of months, hopefully. And so every summer I would go down there and spend my summers down in Mississippi and Laurel. Rarely ever went to Jackson. But it's very easy to sort of say and to walk away and just kind of be let down. But just when you sort of turn your gaze away and you're looking in another direction, something happens. Struggle never goes away. And I believe that things may be down now in Jackson. But you remember when Chokwe was elected and everybody was surprised? Remember how it seemed to come out of nowhere because nobody around the country was really paying that much attention to Jackson, Mississippi? And for that brief moment, that 8 months, not just in Jackson, but around the country, it was just this bright light in the midst of all this darkness. That moment could come again. And that moment might not come in the form of somebody being elected to public office, but it may come in a mass uprising in response to people losing somebody who had such promise and someone being put in their place who's going along with the same neoliberal pro-capitalist agenda. There may come an uprising like that in Jackson, Mississippi, and that's what I choose to believe. And I believe that the comrades that we have, that we work with in MXGM and in other organizations that help build the Jackson Rising Conference, I believe that they will continue to work towards that end of building a struggle. And right now, there may be a focus on cooperatives, but I think that as they go forward, they will realize that even if you were looking to build cooperatives in Jackson, well, first of all, Mississippi's law does not allow for cooperatives outside of farming cooperatives anyway. And they refused to actually send a bill to expand cooperatives outside of committee. So in order to even get to that point, you would need some type of mass struggle, and so you would have to build up the movement again to get to that point. And in the process of doing that, people begin to take up the material needs in their lives and what's actually happening in the city around them beyond just building cooperatives. And I think that the moment will come again. And I believe that Jackson will continue to build, and Jackson will rise, and the Black Belt South will rise. And I think that this is just the beginning. That was just the beginning, and that when you have a beginning, things continue even if it's out of the public eye. And if you look at all the developments, not just in Jackson, but the development in Newark with Ross Baraka, the developments in Seattle, if you look at the fast food struggles, if you look at the struggles against police brutality, I believe that all these struggles are converging. And I think that the way that we can actually begin to build a broad movement that takes into account all working people's issues is to build the assembly movement and let that be the vehicle for which people to continue to fight for power and struggle against the brutal system and those who represent that system. So, I'll leave you with the slogan of the people of Jackson, which rang out from the halls of the building of which we have the Jackson Rising Conference, and that is free the land and all power to the people. To be not so politically connected, but more interested in just building a cooperative, or they actually worked in a cooperative, and that was their primary interest. It's not the right person there, but from the responses I saw, the people I spoke with, it seemed that they weren't really connected to a political movement, and that they weren't less inclined to identify themselves as being, left or or on any side of the political. I mean, generally kind of liberal, but you wouldn't have, from having a conversation, a lot of times I wouldn't identify them as such, and I don't know if they'd identify them. I don't think they'd identify themselves. In some cases, they didn't, as being left. And I think that some of it, it was the case of people feeling that, that they didn't have a lot of opportunities, and they wanted to go someplace that didn't have a lot of infrastructure, and make a living for themselves while maybe providing some need for the area in which they relocated to. And I would, so, and most of the black activists were there. Many of us would know a lot of them, a lot of people from MXGM, Project South, organizations such as that. And as far as political parties, I'm not sure. I know we were there. We had about 3 people, myself, Lamont, and Dante from North Carolina, and a friend who traveled with them. And I think there are people from the Freedom Road, not Fight Back, but the other Freedom Road that were there. And, of course, people from the MXGM, which is a mass organization of the New African People's Organization. But I don't know if any other political parties were there. Black Workers League was there, of course. Yeah, Black Workers League was there. But as far as other than that, I can't say that I saw anyone. I didn't see any papers from any other organizations, which is not really surprising to me, because I think that a lot of the left, the white left is sort of not. People have been very interested, but there hasn't been a lot of writing about Jackson other than some of the organizations that we know of, like Fight Back. They've written about it. Socialist Alternative actually did do an article. It was sort of a thinly veiled attack on Jackson, but they did do an article. And what was that?
What came out?
there wasn't like, out of the conference as a whole, there wasn't, any resolutions that came out. There was not a reconvening of the conference after the workshops. The conference, so I don't know what the action plan is to go forward. In Jackson, I think there was a lot of it was actually networking. It seemed like more than anything, it was a sort of networking conference to find what resources there were in building cooperatives and how the forces in Jackson could connect with them and go forward, and how they could sort of bring them into the movement to struggle to make cooperatives actually legal in Mississippi, and then to give them, to help with the resources to establish different cooperatives there. So I haven't seen anything in the days afterwards, and I didn't see anything that happened at the conference that would suggest there was any sort of resolution that was passed and that the conference was moving forward as a body. So I know it's not necessarily satisfactory, but I think more than anything, it was sort of it was I think it was geared kind of to be a networking conference primarily, and so that's what it was. And most of the attendance was there on the Saturday. The Sunday was more actually Mississippi people, Jackson people that actually came, but they were split up into different workshops. But it was significantly less on Sunday than there was on Saturday. Most people after Saturday had left. So.